I wrote to Connor and he wrote me an email saying, could you speak on that topic? I said, I can't really, because the way you have phrased it leads one to think that evangelical Catholicism is one thing among many optional strands, and it's my understanding. And I said that to Father Terence. He said, oh no, you're going to say it's essential, like that charismatic stuff you're into. Yes. Catholicism is evangelical in its normative form. Catholics who don't evangelize, I don't think they should evangelize, have absorbed some less full understanding of the faith than the one which the Church gives us. Let me draw your attention to some of the things that the Church tells us about evangelization. I noticed in the handouts that there are some passages from Evangelii Nunciandi. Interestingly, I was reading up on this a few weeks ago. It comes out of a synod of bishops in 74, and we know that the voice behind it is Paul VI, who was Pope at the time. But the major drafter of the document was a young Polish archbishop. I think he was already cardinal at the time, Karol Wojtyła. So it's interesting that we have Evangelii Nunciandi already, marked by his thought, and then his own great encyclical, Redemptoris Missio, which is sort of the full flowering of his thought on mission. In Redemptoris Missio, Blessed John Paul II says, proclamation is the permanent priority of mission. The Church cannot elude Christ's explicit mandate, nor deprive men and women of the good news about their being loved and saved by God. One of the things that is essential to our understanding of what it is to be evangelistic or evangelical, to evangelize, is what we're aiming at. And the documents tell us this. In Evangelii Nunciandi 18, which I think is in the handout, it says, the purpose of evangelization is therefore precisely this interior change, meaning conversion. If it had to be expressed in one sentence, the best way of stating it would be to say that the Church evangelizes when she seeks to convert, solely through the divine power of the message she proclaims. So evangelization is not about numbers, it's about a change of heart. But I always have to say, I get very uncomfortable when people say, oh, it's not about numbers, it's about change of heart. And I think, yes, but I want large numbers of people to have a change of heart. That's better than small numbers of people who have a change of heart. So yes, I do think one of the criteria by which we can judge whether our parishes, our orders, our movements are doing what they are called to do is to look at the fruit of conversion among the numbers of people that they draw. Weigel makes this point in his book. Conversion, personal conversion to the Lord, is at the heart of renewing and reforming the Church, according to Weigel's vision of evangelical Catholicism. Looking again at Redemptoris Missio, we see a definition of what this conversion is. The Pope says, from the outset, conversion is expressed in faith which is total and radical, and which neither limits nor hinders God's gift. If I may just stand back from the text for a moment, one of the problems that we have in the Irish Church at the moment is an intergenerational problem and a demographic problem. We've a church that has numbers of young people brought into the church through evangelizing movements like U2000 and others. We have a large cohort at the upper end who grew up in a Catholic culture. We have this younger end who are living in a pagan culture. And we've relatively few numbers of us who should be the active, sort of dynamic age of the group, bridging the gap. I think part of the difficulty that that introduces is that the total and radical faith of young people is sometimes misunderstood or misinterpreted or just downright makes people uncomfortable because they don't relate to the culture which necessitates the radicalness of young people's faith. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. It is a normal and healthy response to a culture which is radically pagan in a way which it wasn't when the older cohort in our church was growing up. And by older, I don't mean people like Brian, I mean even a generation above him. Okay, so let's go back to Redemptoris Missio. This conversion that it's talking about, at the same time, it gives rise to a dynamic and lifelong process which demands a continual turning away from life according to the flesh to life according to the Spirit. Conversion means accepting by a personal decision the saving sovereignty of Christ and becoming his disciple. Now, I'm not into these sat-nav things, or rather, I can't afford one, but I am into maps. For me, in learning my faith, there were certain maps which became really sort of door openers into a deeper understanding of my faith. For example, the first time anybody laid out in front of me the history of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, how to read the Old Testament not as this sort of eclectic mix of texts and you didn't know what they were talking about, but actually being able to follow the thread through Abraham and Moses and David and so on. I suddenly thought, my goodness, I've got a map of the territory and now I can examine parts in greater detail, but at least I have a map. Another useful map for us is the fourfold structure of the Catechism. I remember encountering that for the first time and thinking, oh my goodness, that's how you catechize. You make sure people know the content of the faith, they know how to practice it in the sacraments, they know how to live it in their daily lives, in their moral lives, and you teach them to pray. And that's pretty much it. I thought, wow, I have a map. I think we need some maps around evangelisation, conversion, and discipleship. Partly because in this new evangelisation situation, we have to learn how to distinguish whether a person is attending church but unconverted, or partly converted but undiscipled, or you've been trying to disciple them without seeing are they converted. You know, we've got this mix of experiences that aren't necessarily well sewn up together. Two pieces of writing, if you like, which I think are useful in this regard. One is a book by Sherry Waddell, which I know Father Brian has been promoting, called Intentional Discipleship. In that piece of work, which I would strongly recommend to anybody with half a heart for the church, she lays out borrowing from John Paul, what she calls thresholds of faith. So the end point is in what she calls intentional discipleship. I think what is being described here as conversion. Someone who definitely and clearly is saying, yes, I'm following Jesus, and that decision governs everything that I do in my life. I don't mean that we're without sin, but I just mean it has occurred to me that I need to put my finances and my work decisions and my family life under the lordship of Jesus Christ. That's intentional discipleship. But she describes a couple of thresholds, trusting someone enough to listen to their experience of what faith means for them. You know, she describes one girl that she met, and her trust relationship was, she was an Indian living in India, and she'd been to a secondary school run by nuns. So these were the first Christians she'd ever met, and she liked them. So there was a relationship of trust there with those nuns, which opened up the possibility for her of at least hearing the Christian message. She talks about openness. She talks about, she talks about curiosity. And I think she draws an interesting point in distinguishing curiosity about the faith, which is a preliminary stage, from actively seeking or active discipleship. And sometimes I think we mistake that in our parishes. Someone is curious about the faith, they want to find out a bit more, and we think they're all ready for leadership and ministry, when in fact they haven't crossed that bridge of actually making a personal decision. So I think she gives us a useful roadmap for evangelisation to conversion. A further roadmap for discipleship, I think, is provided in a very short document by it's a Catholic Students Focus. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's on the web, and I'm sure Conal put the resource on the web there. But they provide a little thing called a discipleship roadmap. A simple one-pager thing. But they go through stages of beginning discipleship, when you have just come into your faith or just refound your faith and you're starting to grow. Growing as a discipleship where you're bringing all those disparate areas of life in under the lordship of Jesus and making the changes, the renewing that needs to go on. Coming to know yourself as a commissioned disciple, someone whom God has entrusted a mission to and actively seeking to go out and do that, and then going on to become yourself a discipler of other people, someone who helps other people grow as disciples of Jesus. And they talk about this having a spiritual multiplier effect as people come in and grow towards maturity and then go on to bring others along the same journey. I think it is also a very useful roadmap. 10 minutes is a ridiculous amount of time for any speaker, I have to say. Especially for me, thank you. Women, what can you do with them? I couldn't finish without just touching on this. In Evangelii Nuncii 24, which I do think is on the handout, it says, the person who has been evangelised goes on to evangelise others. Here lies the touchstone of truth, the touchstone of evangelisation. It is unthinkable that a person should accept the word and give himself to the kingdom without becoming a person who bears witness to it and proclaims it in his turn. I think we need to be sensitive to that within pastoral ministry. How mature is this Christian? Well, when their heart is being inclined towards sharing their faith, you know that their own conversion is in a healthy state. I think a Catholicism which sees itself as a personal, private matter in I know they can have other meanings, but in the sort of colloquial, poor sense of the word, that's a Catholicism that needs to be challenged, because it really isn't in shape with the way the Church describes it. Right, I wouldn't be me if I didn't actually end on this note. What have you done for him lately is my sort of final comment. One of the things that I've just been doing lately, so just let me tell you some anecdotes. I sort of received a kick up the behind from the Lord, who said, what are you actually doing to evangelise? Now, I'm on a mission team and I do formal evangelisation, if you like. I have situations in my life where I'm actively doing that sort of stuff. And he said, no, I'm not talking about that sort of stuff, Rosemary. I'm talking about how ready are you to speak the word to someone at a moment's notice. So I've been trying to take that on board in very little ways. There's someone I admire very much, a man called Paddy Monaghan, who many of you may know. But Paddy and myself and about 200 other people, we were on mission in Galway for the summer, for a couple of weeks in the summer. And it included doing street outreach. And so we'd meet in the morning, have mass and pray, and then we'd go out to the square and various different places that we were doing outreach. And so we'd go out, and when we got to where we were going, we'd start to talk to people about the gospel, but not Paddy. Paddy, when he left the building, would start talking to people about the gospel. So I remember, the bus stop for the bus into the city centre was outside the building we were in. Paddy was at the bus stop speaking to the other people waiting for the bus. And there was just something about him. I thought, I have boxed up doing evangelisation into something formal. When I'm on mission, I do it, and the rest of the time's my own time. Really, to live as a converted person is to be constantly seeking opportunities to share the gospel. I know people can feel uncomfortable about it, but I personally was converted back to my childhood Catholic faith, which I had abandoned, by someone who was giving out Bibles outside the GPO. The sort of person that most people would say, that really isn't the way we evangelise now because we know so much better. But you know what? It worked for me. Mightn't have worked for you. You might have needed something far more erudite and slick than I needed. I just needed a good bit of crude in your face. This is the gospel and this is what Jesus has to say to you. And it worked for me. So my challenge to you is, what are you actually able to do today or tomorrow or Tuesday or Wednesday to evangelise? My challenge to you is for every day for the next week, actively do one thing that you would not have done if you hadn't been here to evangelise someone. Don't care what it is. There's a U2000 retreat on in Stillorgan. I've got some posters in my bag. My current one a day is to find someone to give one a day. I'm sure there's something in your area that you could be inviting someone to. Invitation is a great way. But what can you do? There is no point us having nice theological discussions about conversion and evangelisation if the real point is not to acknowledge that there are people out there who are hurt because they don't know Jesus, and it's our job to get that message out there.